The distant clatter of hooves against dusty earth was the only warning Zelda Reed had before her husband's wagon rolled into view. Her heart leapt to her throat as she hastily pulled down her sleeves, covering the purple-yellow marks that mapped her arms like an unwanted constellation. 5 months pregnant and living in fear had become her daily existence in the small frontier town of Cottonwood Springs, Colorado Territory, 1872. "Best get supper ready," she whispered to herself, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear as she hurried from the porch into their modest cabin. Her movements were careful, measured, her body still aching from Vernon's last outburst 3 nights prior. The cabin door slammed open just as she reached for the cast iron pot. Vernon Reed's imposing figure filled the doorway, his normally handsome features twisted by something Zelda had come to recognize as the calm before the storm. "Ain't nothing to eat yet." His voice was deceptively soft. "Been working all day and come home to nothing." "I'm just starting now, Vernon. The stew won't take but a half hour." The back of his hand caught her cheekbone before she could finish. Zelda staggered but remained upright, one hand instinctively moving to shield her swollen belly. "Don't you dare make excuses," Vernon hissed, grabbing her wrist. "My pa was right. I should have never married a woman who can't even keep a proper house." Zelda said nothing. Experience had taught her that words only fueled his rage. She merely nodded, eyes downcast, waiting for the moment to pass. But this evening, something different happened. Vernon's gaze settled on her abdomen, his expression darkening further, and that, he muttered, gesturing toward her pregnancy, "Who's to say that's even mine, the way you used to smile at that store clerk?" "Vernon, please," Zelda whispered, true fear gripping her heart. "You know that's not true." His response was another blow, this one sending her to the floor. As she curled protectively around her unborn child, Vernon grabbed his hat. "I'm heading to the saloon. Have something decent ready when I get back." The door slammed, and Zelda allowed herself a single sob before pushing herself up. The decision formed in her mind with unexpected clarity. She couldn't stay, not another night. Within 20 minutes, she had gathered what little belonged to her: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the small amount of money she'd managed to hide beneath a loose floorboard. Barely $10 to her name, but it would have to do. As darkness fell, Zelda slipped away from the only home she'd known since her wedding day 18 months ago. Cottonwood Springs was a small town, but the night offered some cover as she made her way toward the stage-coach station. There wouldn't be any coach until morning, but the small bench outside would serve as shelter enough. The next morning dawned cool and clear. Zelda had dozed fitfully, always starting awake at the slightest sound, terrified Vernon would discover her absence and come looking. Her face throbbed where his hand had connected, and she carefully arranged her shawl to hide the worst of it. "Morning, madam." The station master's voice startled her. He was an older man with kind eyes that widened slightly as he took in her disheveled appearance. "You been waiting all night." "Just since early morning," she lied. "When does the next coach leave?" "Heading north to Boulder in about an hour. Fare's $2. Zelda nodded, relieved. Boulder was far enough that Vernon wouldn't think to look for her there immediately. She had an aunt who had moved there years ago. She hoped the woman might take her in, at least until she could figure out what to do next. The hour passed with excruciating slowness. Each minute, Zelda expected to see Vernon's tall figure striding toward the station, face contorted with rage. But when the coach finally arrived, there was still no sign of him. "All aboard for Boulder," called the driver. With trembling hands, Zelda paid her fare and climbed awkwardly into the coach, her pregnancy making the high step challenging. Inside were 2 other passengers, a well-dressed older woman who barely acknowledged her and a portly gentleman who tipped his hat politely. "Last call for Boulder." The driver's voice rang out again. Just as the coach was about to depart, a commotion erupted from down the street. Zelda's blood ran cold as she heard Vernon's distinctive bellow. "Stop that, coach." She shrank into her seat, pulling her shawl closer around her face, but the driver had already cracked his whip and the horses lurched forward. Through the small window, Zelda caught a glimpse of Vernon running toward them, his face purple with rage. But the coach was faster, and within moments, they had left Cottonwood Springs behind. The journey to Boulder took the better part of the day. Zelda's back ached from the constant jarring of the coach over rough terrain, and her nerves remained frayed from the narrow escape. Neither of her fellow passengers seemed inclined toward conversation, for which she was grateful. By the time they arrived in Boulder, the sun was beginning to set. The town was considerably larger than Cottonwood Springs, with proper streets and substantial buildings lining the main thoroughfare. Zelda gathered her meager possessions and stepped down from the coach, momentarily overwhelmed by the bustle around her. Finding her aunt's home proved more difficult than anticipated. After nearly an hour of wandering and asking directions from reluctant strangers, Zelda finally located the small house on the edge of town. Her spirits sank when she saw the darkened windows and overgrown yard. A neighbor confirmed her fears. Martha Collins had passed away the previous winter. With nowhere else to go and night falling fast, Zelda found herself at the town's modest hotel. The room would cost her nearly half of her remaining money, but she had little choice. Just for tonight, she told herself as she settled onto the narrow bed. Tomorrow I'll figure something out, but morning brought no new solutions. Zelda ventured into town, hoping to find work, but most establishments showed little interest in hiring a visibly pregnant woman. By midday, desperation had begun to set in. Her funds would last perhaps another day or two at most. It was as she passed the livery stable that fate intervened. A commotion from inside caught her attention, angry voices followed by the sound of something heavy falling. Without thinking, Zelda rushed through the open doors. Inside, a man lay sprawled in the hay, blood flowing from a gash on his forehead. Another man stood over him, fists clenched. "I said I ain't paying more than what we agreed." The standing man shouted. The injured man struggled to rise. "And I'm telling you, Nash, that horse is worth twice what you're offering." The standing man, Nash, drew back his foot to deliver a kick, but Zelda's voice rang out. "Stop it, he's hurt." Both men turned toward her, surprise evident on their faces. Zelda hurried to the fallen man's side, pulling her handkerchief from her pocket to press against the bleeding wound. "This needs stitching," she said, years of tending to her own injuries making her assessment confident. Nash Westfield had been having a thoroughly bad day even before this woman appeared like an apparition in the stable doorway. His cattle drive had been delayed. Two of his best hands had quit to try their luck in the silver mines, and now this horse trader was trying to rob him blind. But something about the woman's authoritative tone made him step back. "He tried to cheat me," Nash said, his voice gruff but the edge of violence fading. "That may be," the woman replied, not looking up from her ministrations, "but beating him senseless won't solve anything." Nash took a moment to really look at her. She was clearly with child, her condition visible despite the loose-fitting dress she wore. Her face was partially obscured as she bent over the horse trader, but Nash caught sight of something that made his jaw tighten, the unmistakable discoloration of a bruise on her cheekbone. "Illy," Nash called to his young ranch hand who had been watching wide-eyed from the corner. "Go fetch Doc Peterson." As the boy scurried off, Nash approached the woman cautiously. "Madam, I apologize you had to see that. I lost my temper." She finally looked up at him, and Nash felt an odd sensation in his chest. Despite the bruise marring her face and the wariness in her eyes, she was beautiful, delicate features framed by auburn hair escaping from a simple knot at her nape. "I've seen worse," she said quietly, and something in her tone told Nash that she had indeed. "I'm Nash Westfield," he said, removing his hat. "I own a cattle ranch north of town." "Zelda Reed," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "I'm new to Boulder." The horse trader groaned, drawing their attention back to him. By the time the doctor arrived, the bleeding had mostly stopped, but the man was clearly concussed. After a brief examination, Doc Peterson declared he needed rest and proper care. "I can't very well leave him here," the doctor said, looking pointedly at Nash. Nash sighed, recognizing his responsibility. "We'll take him to my place in town. I've got rooms above the mercantile." As they helped the horse trader to his feet, Nash noticed Zelda swaying slightly, her face pale. "Mrs. Reed, are you all right?" She nodded, though her expression belied her words. "Just a little tired. I should be going." "Where are you staying?" Nash asked, the hotel, but she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. But, he prompted gently. I can only afford one more night, Zelda admitted, her pride clearly wounded by the confession. Nash considered the woman before him. Everything about her screamed of trouble. She was pregnant, injured, and apparently without means. Getting involved would be foolish. Yet the bruise on her face and the protective way she cradled her belly stirred something in him he couldn't ignore. Mrs. Reed, I have a proposition for you, he said. My housekeeper at the ranch quit last month. The position comes with room and board and reasonable wages. If you're interested, that is, Zelda's eyes widened. But she gestured to her swollen abdomen. I reckon babies are born every day, Nash said with a shrug. And from what I just saw, you've got a steady head in a crisis. That's worth something on a ranch. Hope warred with suspicion on Zelda's face. Why would you offer a job to a stranger? Nash's gaze flicked briefly to the bruise on her cheek. Let's just say I recognize someone who could use a fresh start. The decision shouldn't have been easy, but with her options dwindling by the hour, Zelda found herself agreeing to Nash Westfield's offer. They arranged to meet the following morning. She would finish her stay at the hotel, and he would return from delivering the injured horse trader to his town lodgings. That night, alone in her hotel room, Zelda allowed herself to consider the man who had unexpectedly become her employer. Nash Westfield was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned face, and though she had witnessed his temper, he had pulled himself back from violence when she intervened. That alone made him different from Vernon. Still, experience had taught her to be wary of a man's kindness. It often came with expectations. Morning arrived with a sense of both trepidation and hope. Zelda gathered her few belongings and made her way to the meeting place, Boulder's general store. Nash was already waiting, leaning against a wagon loaded with supplies. Mrs. Reed, he greeted her, tipping his hat. Ready to head out, Zelda nodded, allowing him to help her onto the wagon seat. As they left town behind, Nash kept a respectful distance on the bench, making occasional comments about the landscape or the weather, but otherwise allowing silence to settle comfortably between them. The Westfield Ranch came into view after about an hour's journey, a sprawling property nestled against the foothills of the mountains. The main house was larger than Zelda had expected, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. It's beautiful, she said honestly. Nash's expression softened with evident pride. Built most of it myself over the past 5 years. Started with just the center portion after I bought the land from Old Man Henderson. As they approached, several ranch hands paused in their work to observe the newcomer. Zelda felt their curious gazes and instinctively adjusted her shawl to better cover her bruised face. Don't mind them, Nash said quietly. They're just not used to seeing a woman around here since Mrs. Holloway left. Inside, the house was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's residence. Simple but solid furniture filled the rooms, and large windows let in ample light. Nash showed her to a bedroom at the rear of the house, small but comfortable, with its own wash basin and a view of the mountains. This was meant to be part of the family quarters, he explained somewhat awkwardly. Never got around to having a family, so it's been sitting empty. Zelda set her small bag on the bed. It's lovely, Mr. Westfield. Nash, he corrected. We don't stand on formality much out here. He left her to settle in, explaining that the afternoon meal would be in an hour. Once alone, Zelda sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her circumstances had changed. Yesterday, she had been nearly destitute in a strange town. Today, she had shelter, the promise of wages, and an employer who, despite his evident capacity for anger, had shown her only kindness thus far. Please let this be real, she whispered, one hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked as if in response. The days that followed established a rhythm to life at the Westfield Ranch. Zelda took to her duties with determination, grateful for work that kept her hands and mind occupied. She prepared meals for Nash and the ranch hands, maintained the house, and assisted with various other tasks that didn't strain her in her condition. Nash proved to be a fair employer. He was often away during the day, tending to ranch business, But they shared evening meals during which he gradually drew out bits of her story, where she was from, her knowledge of cooking and household management, her interest in herbal remedies. Zelda offered carefully edited versions of her past, never mentioning Vernon or the true reason for her flight from Cottonwood Springs. But Nash Westfield was no fool. He had recognized the marks of abuse the moment he saw her, though he never directly addressed them. Instead, he demonstrated a surprising sensitivity, never making sudden movements around her and announcing his presence before entering a room where she worked. 2 weeks into her stay, as Zelda was hanging laundry in the yard, she noticed a rider approaching at speed. Something in the distant figure's outline sent a chill through her, and the basket of wet clothes slipped from her grasp. "Mrs. Reed," Nash appeared from the barn, frowning at her evident distress. "Someone's coming," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Nash squinted toward the approaching rider, then glanced back at Zelda's pale face. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Go inside," he said gently but firmly. "Whatever happens, stay there." Zelda didn't need to be told twice. She hurried into the house, her heart hammering against her ribs. From the window, she watched as Nash walked calmly to meet the rider, his hand resting casually near the revolver at his hip. As the rider drew closer, relief flooded through her. It wasn't Vernon, but one of Nash's men returning from town. The conversation between them was brief, and when Nash turned back toward the house, his expression was grim. "Zelda," he called, using her given name for the first time as he strode through the door. "We need to talk." She stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, hands twisted in her apron. "A man's been asking about you in Boulder," Nash said without preamble. "Tall fellow, dark hair, mean look about him, goes by the name of Reed." Zelda's legs gave way and she sank into a kitchen chair. "Vernon," she whispered. Nash pulled out a chair across from her. "I reckon it's time you told me what you're running from, Zelda, all of it." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. Then the words came in a rush, like water breaking through a dam, her hasty marriage at 18 to a man who had seemed so charming during courtship. The first blow that came barely a month after their wedding, the escalating violence, the pregnancy that had briefly stemmed his rage before making it worse, her desperate flight. Throughout her confession, Nash remained silent, but she could see the muscle in his jaw tightening with each new detail. When she finally fell quiet, he reached across the table as if to take her hand, then seemed to think better of it. "He won't find you here," Nash said with quiet conviction. "And if he does, he'll regret it." "You don't know Vernon," Zelda replied, fear evident in her voice. "He's relentless when he feels wronged." Nash's blue eyes hardened. "And you don't know me, Zelda. I protect what's mine, and right now, that includes you and your child as residents of this ranch." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to her eyes. How long had it been since anyone had offered her protection rather than pain? Nash stood, his decision made. "I'm doubling the hands on watch. No one gets near this house without me knowing about it." That night, sleep eluded Zelda. Every creak of the settling house, every distant sound from the ranch had her starting awake, certain that Vernon had found her. Near dawn, exhaustion finally pulled her under, only for her to wake hours later to the sound of raised voices. She rose quickly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders before moving cautiously to the window. In the yard below, Nash stood facing a man Zelda had never seen before, older, with a silver badge glinting on his chest. A lawman, heart in her throat, she dressed hastily and made her way downstairs. Nash looked up as she entered the kitchen, his expression carefully neutral. "Zelda, this is Sheriff Donovan from Boulder. He'd like to speak with you." The sheriff removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. His weathered face was serious but not unkind. "Mrs. Reed," he began, "a man named Vernon Reed has filed a report claiming his pregnant wife ran away from their home in Cottonwood Springs. Says you took family money and valuables when you left." Zelda's hand went instinctively to her bruised cheek, though the mark had faded considerably over the past weeks. "That's not true," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I took only what was mine, my clothes, and a few personal items. The money was what I'd saved from selling eggs and mending clothes." Sheriff Donovan's gaze lingered on her face, then dropped to her swollen abdomen. "He also claims you're unstable, says your condition makes you prone to delusions. At this, Nash made a sound suspiciously like a growl. Sheriff, with all due respect, does that sound like a concerned husband to you? Or a man trying to discredit his wife before she can speak against him? The sheriff sighed, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Westfield, this isn't my jurisdiction. I'm just passing along information from the Cottonwood Springs authorities. And have you told them where Mrs. Reed is? Nash asked sharply. No, the sheriff replied, but I can't lie if asked directly. The law should protect innocent women and unborn children, Nash interrupted. Not return them to men who beat them. Sheriff Donovan had the grace to look ashamed. I agree with you there, Mr. Westfield, which is why I came personally instead of sending a deputy. I wanted to see the situation for myself. He turned to Zelda. Mrs. Reed, I have no authority to force you to return to your husband, but I should warn you that he's offered a reward for information about your whereabouts. $50 is a lot of money to some folks around here. Zelda's stomach knotted with fear. What will you tell him? The sheriff placed his hat back on his head. I'll tell him I've made inquiries in Boulder as requested but found no sign of you. Beyond that, I can make no promises except that I won't volunteer information. After the sheriff departed, Nash paced the kitchen like a caged predator. We need to be prepared, he said finally. Vernon Reed won't stop looking and $50 will loosen a lot of tongues. I should leave, Zelda said quietly. I've brought danger to your door. Nash stopped pacing, his expression fierce. You'll do no such thing. Where would you go? How would you survive? I don't know, she admitted, but I can't bear the thought of bringing trouble to you after all your kindness. Nash moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. Zelda, listen to me. I've spent my life building this ranch, making it a place worth defending. But a man needs something more than land and cattle to fight for. The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. What are you saying? I'm saying that in the few weeks you've been here, this place has felt more like a home than it has in 5 years. I'm saying that I won't let a coward who raises his hand to his wife take you away. That evening, Nash gathered his most trusted ranch hands in the main room of the house. Without revealing the details of Zelda's situation, he explained that trouble might be coming and set up a schedule of increased patrols around the property. Anyone approaching who isn't known to us gets stopped at the boundary line, he instructed, politely but firmly. If they insist on coming further, one of you rides back to alert me immediately. The men exchanged glances but asked no questions. Their loyalty to Nash was evident, and that would have to be enough. Days passed with no sign of Vernon, yet the threat of his appearance hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. Zelda found herself jumping at shadows, her nerves increasingly frayed by the constant vigilance. It was during this tense period that she and Nash began to forge a deeper connection. Their conversations over evening meals grew longer, more personal. Nash spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his journey west after the war, his dreams for the ranch. In turn, Zelda shared stories of her parents who had died of fever when she was 16, her love of books, her hope to someday learn proper medicine. You'd make a fine doctor, Nash told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. You've got the right temperament for it, calm in a crisis, steady hands. Zelda smiled, touched by his confidence in her. Women aren't doctors, Nash. Some are, he countered. Read about a woman doctor back east in a newspaper. Times are changing. Perhaps, she allowed, her hand resting on her belly where the baby moved restlessly. But my responsibilities will be different soon. Nash's gaze followed her movement. May I? He asked hesitantly, gesturing toward her abdomen. Surprised by the request, Zelda nodded. Nash reached out slowly, placing his large, calloused hand gently on the swell of her stomach. The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, and Nash's eyes widened with wonder. That's something, he said softly. A whole new person in there. The intimacy of the moment struck Zelda with unexpected force. Here was a man who had every reason to keep his distance. She was another man's wife, carrying another man's child, yet he looked at her with nothing but warmth and respect. As if sensing her thoughts, Nash withdrew his hand. I apologize if that was too forward. No, Zelda said quickly. It wasn't, it's just, no one has ever shown interest in the baby before, not even. She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Nash's expression darkened. A man who doesn't cherish his own child doesn't deserve to be called a father. The conversation might have continued, but one of the ranch hands approached with news that a section of fence needed repair before nightfall. Nash excused himself, leaving Zelda to ponder the strange turn her life had taken and the even stranger feelings beginning to take root in her heart. The confrontation, when it finally came, arrived with the first snowfall of the season. November had brought colder temperatures to the foothills, and Zelda had awoken that morning to find the world transformed into a pristine white landscape. Despite the beauty, the snow filled her with unease. It would make travel more difficult if she needed to flee. She was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the commotion outside shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The wooden spoon she'd been holding clattered to the floor as Zelda rushed to the window. Through the swirling snow, she could make out several figures near the barn. Two of Nash's men were restraining someone, while a third lay on the ground clutching his arm. Nash himself stood a few paces away, his revolver drawn. And then she saw him, Vernon Reed, his face contorted with rage as he struggled against the men holding him. Zelda's blood ran cold. He had found her. Despite all precautions, despite the distance, despite the approaching winter, Vernon had tracked her down. She should hide, she knew. Lock herself in her room and let Nash handle the situation. But a strange calm settled over her instead. Wrapping her shawl tightly around her shoulders, Zelda stepped out onto the porch. "Vernon," she called, her voice carrying across the yard, all heads turned toward her. Vernon renewed his struggles, a string of obscenities falling from his lips. Nash moved to stand between them, his stance protective. "Get back inside, Zelda," he ordered without taking his eyes off Vernon, but Zelda descended the porch steps, moving carefully across the snow-covered ground. "It's all right, Nash, let me speak to him." "Like hell," Nash growled. "This man shot Billy, he's not getting anywhere near you," Vernon sneered. "That's my wife you're giving orders to, mister, and she's carrying my child. You've no right to keep her here." "I'm not keeping her anywhere," Nash replied coldly. "She chose to leave you. I wonder why that might be." Vernon's face darkened. "She's confused. Her condition makes women addled sometimes. Ain't that right, Zelda? Tell these men you're coming home now." Zelda stopped a few paces from the group, close enough to see the hatred in Vernon's eyes, yet far enough that she felt safe with Nash between them. "I'm not confused, Vernon," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I'm not coming back, not now, not ever." Vernon lunged forward, nearly breaking free of the men restraining him. "You ungrateful whore, after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done," Zelda echoed, a lifetime of fear and resentment rising in her throat. "You mean the bruises, the broken ribs." "The nights I spent terrified in my own home." Her words seemed to shock everyone into stillness. Even Vernon fell momentarily silent, perhaps surprised by her defiance after so long accepting his abuse in silence. Nash was the first to recover. "You heard her," he said, his voice dangerously soft as he addressed Vernon. "She's not going anywhere with you." Vernon spat on the ground. "She's my legal wife, the law's on my side." "The law might be," Nash conceded, "but I'm not, and neither are my men." As if to emphasize his point, several more ranch hands emerged from the barn, each armed. The message was clear: Vernon was outnumbered and unwelcome. "Get him on his horse," Nash ordered. "Escort him to the property line. If he returns, he won't leave upright." As the men dragged Vernon toward his waiting mount, he shouted back at Zelda. "This ain't over. You hear me, Zelda? You belong to me by law and by God." Nash moved to Zelda's side as Vernon was forced onto his horse. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though in truth she felt lightheaded with a mixture of fear and strange exhilaration. For the first time since her marriage, she had stood up to Vernon, had spoken the truth aloud instead of hiding it behind shame and silence. "Come inside," Nash said, placing a gentle hand at the small of her back. "You shouldn't be out in this cold." In the kitchen, Nash poured them both coffee while Zelda sat at the table, her hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. "He'll be back," she said softly. "Vernon doesn't give up when he thinks he's been wronged." Nash set a steaming cup before her. Let him come. Next time he won't get as warm a welcome. Zelda looked up at him, this man who had become her protector with no obligation to do so. Why are you doing this, Nash? Why risk so much for me? He took the seat across from her, his blue eyes serious. When I first saw you in that stable in Boulder, standing up to me despite being afraid, I admired your courage. When I saw the bruises on your face, I wanted to find the man responsible and teach him a lesson he'd never forget. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. And then, as I got to know you these past weeks, your kindness, your strength, the way you've made this place feel like a real home, I realized something. What? Zelda whispered. Nash reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing hers tentatively. I realized I'd defend you with my last breath, Zelda Reed. No one hurts you again while I live, that's a promise. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Zelda's eyes. She turned her hand to clasp his, a silent acknowledgement of what remained unspoken between them, that what had begun as employer and employee had grown into something deeper, something neither had anticipated. He's still my husband, she said finally, the words heavy with regret. Nash's expression hardened. A husband who beats his wife forfeits the right to be called one. The law doesn't see it that way. Then we'll find a way around the law, Nash declared. People disappear out west all the time. New names, new starts. If that's what it takes to keep you safe, that's what we'll do. The idea was tempting to simply vanish, to become someone else somewhere far away, but Zelda knew that running would mean always looking over her shoulder, always fearing discovery. I can't live that way, she said. And I won't ask you to either. Nash squeezed her hand. Then we face this head-on, together. The word resonated through Zelda like the peal of a bell. For so long she had been alone even within her marriage. The concept of truly standing alongside someone rather than cowering behind them was foreign yet profoundly appealing. The following days brought an uneasy peace to the ranch. Billy, the hand who had been shot, was recovering well under Zelda's care. His injury had been relatively minor. The bullet had grazed his upper arm, painful but not life-threatening. Still, the incident had put everyone on edge. Nash doubled the night watch and sent word to Sheriff Donovan about Vernon's attack. The sheriff promised to keep an eye out but made no guarantees the incident had occurred outside his jurisdiction, and without more serious injury, there was little legal action he could take. As November deepened toward December, Zelda's pregnancy advanced into its final weeks. Her movements became more cumbersome, and Nash insisted she reduce her duties around the ranch. Instead, he hired a young woman from town, Eliza Jenkins, to assist with the heavier household tasks. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Nash returned from town with unexpected news. I've been making some inquiries, he said as they sat before the fire after supper, about divorce laws in the Colorado Territory. Zelda looked up sharply from her mending. Divorce? Nash nodded, his expression serious. It's possible, though not easy, especially in cases of. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the term, marital cruelty. Hope flared briefly in Zelda's chest before reality dampened it. Vernon would never agree, and even if he did, the process would take months, perhaps years. There might be another way, Nash said carefully. If we could prove he abandoned you rather than you leaving him, Zelda frowned. But that's not what happened. No one in Cottonwood Springs knows you're here specifically, Nash explained. What if you returned briefly with protection, of course, and established yourself there again? If Vernon subsequently failed to return home for a certain period, it could constitute abandonment. The idea was clever but dangerous. He would find me immediately. Not if we time it right, Nash insisted. My friend Marcus is the marshal in Silver Creek, about 30 miles from Cottonwood Springs. He owes me a favor if Vernon could be detained there on some pretext. Zelda shook her head, unconvinced. It's too risky, and what about the baby? I'm due within weeks. Nash leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know it's not ideal, Zelda, but I've been thinking about this from every angle. You deserve your freedom, you and your child. A fresh start without looking over your shoulder for the rest of your lives. His concern for her future touched Zelda deeply. Vernon had never considered what she wanted or needed. His focus had always been on what she could provide for him. Nash's selfless planning on her behalf was yet another reminder of the stark difference between the two men. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "After the baby comes, perhaps." Nash nodded, accepting her decision without argument. Of course, there's time yet. But time, as it happened, was not on their side. 3 nights later, Zelda awoke to the acrid smell of smoke. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it, but then she heard shouting from outside. Struggling to her feet, she moved to the window and gasped at the sight that greeted her. The barn was ablaze, flames reaching hungrily toward the night sky. Ranch hands rushed about with buckets of water, trying desperately to contain the fire before it spread to the nearby structures. Zelda pulled on her robe and hurried downstairs, her heart racing. In the kitchen, Eliza was already filling buckets from the pump. "What happened?" Zelda asked, moving to help despite her ungainly condition. "Don't know," Eliza replied breathlessly. "One of the men spotted the flames just a few minutes ago. Mr. Westfield is out there organizing the bucket line." Through the window, Zelda could see Nash directing the efforts, his face illuminated by the orange glow of the fire. Even from a distance, she could read the tension in his body, the controlled urgency of his movements. As she watched, one of the hands sprinted toward the house, his expression grim. "Miss Eliza," he called as he burst through the door. "Mr. Westfield says to hitch up the wagon quick. We need to get Mrs. Reed to town." "Why?" Zelda asked, alarm rising within her. "What's happened?" The young man, Jake, she recalled, looked uncomfortable. "Found signs that someone cut through the fence on the north side, and this weren't no accident." He gestured toward the burning barn. "Mr. Westfield thinks whoever said it might be coming for the house next." Vernon. It had to be. The realization settled like ice in Zelda's stomach. "Where is Nash now?" "Trying to save what livestock he can," Jake replied. "Said to tell you he'll catch up once you're safely away." Panic seized Zelda at the thought of leaving without Nash. "No, I can't." A sharp pain cut off her words, radiating from her back around to her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table for support. Eliza was at her side instantly. "Mrs. Reed, are you all right?" Another pain answered the question, this one strong enough to make Zelda's knees buckle. "The baby," she managed to say through gritted teeth. "I think it's coming." Eliza and Jake exchanged alarmed glances. "It's too soon to move her," Eliza said decisively. "Jake, go tell Mr. Westfield, now." As Jake rushed out, Eliza helped Zelda to a chair. "Breathe steady, Mrs. Reed. First babies often take their time. We might still get you to town before things progress too far." But Zelda, gripping the young woman's hand through another contraction, knew differently. "No time," she gasped. "It's happening fast." Outside, the chaos of the fire continued. Shouts, the frightened whinnying of horses, the ominous crack of burning timber. Through it all, Zelda remained focused on the life demanding entry into the world, each contraction bringing it closer despite the danger surrounding them. Nash appeared in the doorway, his face and clothes smudged with soot. "Zelda," he exclaimed, rushing to her side. "Jake said the baby is coming," she confirmed, managing a strained smile. "Inconvenient timing, I know." Despite the situation, Nash choked out a laugh. "Trust you to joke at a time like this." His expression quickly sobered. "We need to get you somewhere safer. The fire's mostly contained, but I don't trust this is the end of it." "She can't be moved right now," Eliza insisted. "The baby's coming too quickly." Nash ran a hand through his hair, clearly torn between multiple urgent concerns. "Then we defend this position," he decided. "Jake, get the men to finish with the barn, then establish a perimeter around the house. Armed, no one approaches without my say-so." As Jake hurried to carry out the orders, Nash knelt beside Zelda. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "This isn't how this should be happening." Zelda reached for his hand, needing his strength as another contraction built. "None of this is your fault." "I should have anticipated he'd try something like this," Nash said, self-recrimination evident in his voice. "Vernon has always been unpredictable," Zelda gasped as the pain peaked. "That's what makes him dangerous." For the next hour, as the labor intensified, Nash remained by Zelda's side while his men secured the property. Eliza proved knowledgeable about childbirth, having assisted her mother who had been a midwife. Under her guidance, they moved Zelda to her bedroom, made her as comfortable as possible, and prepared for the imminent arrival. You're doing wonderfully, Eliza encouraged as Zelda bore down with a particularly powerful contraction. I can see the head. One more big push should do it. Nash held Zelda's hand, his presence a steady anchor through the storm of pain and exertion. You can do this, he murmured. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. With a final, tremendous effort, Zelda felt the baby slide from her body, the relief immediate and overwhelming. A moment of silence, then a lusty cry filled the room. A girl, Eliza announced, quickly wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. A perfect little girl. She placed the tiny bundle in Zelda's arms, and the world seemed to narrow to just this moment, just this miracle. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when she briefly opened them, eyes of deepest blue. Zelda felt tears stream down her face as she counted 10 fingers, 10 toes, marveling at the perfection of this new life. She's beautiful, Nash said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Just like her mother. Zelda looked up at him, seeing in his face a reflection of her own wonder and joy. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that whatever came next, they would face it together, this child now an unbreakable bond connecting them. The peaceful moment was shattered by a gunshot from outside, followed by shouts of alarm. Nash was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Stay here, he ordered, drawing his revolver. Eliza, bar the door behind me. Before either woman could protest, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Eliza hurried to secure it, then returned to Zelda's side. What's happening? Zelda asked, clutching her newborn daughter closer. Eliza shook her head. I don't know. But Mr. Westfield won't let anything happen to you or the baby, I'm sure of it. More gunshots rang out, closer this time. Zelda strained to hear voices through the commotion, desperate for some indication of what was occurring. Was Vernon out there? Had he brought others with him? Was Nash in danger because of her? The minutes stretched endlessly, marked only by the baby's occasional whimpers and the distant sounds of conflict. Zelda found herself praying for Nash, for her daughter, for an end to the fear that had shadowed her for so long. Finally, a knock came at the door. Eliza, Zelda, it's me, Nash called. Eliza quickly unbarred the door, revealing Nash looking grim but uninjured. Is everyone all right? Zelda asked immediately. Nash nodded, moving to her bedside. We are. Vernon and 2 others tried to approach from the south pasture. My men intercepted them. And, Zelda prompted, reading more in his expression. Vernon took a bullet in the shoulder, Nash said evenly. Not life-threatening, but enough to stop him. Sheriff Donovan arrived with some deputies. Just afterward, apparently one of the hands I'd sent to town for the doctor thought to alert the law as well. Relief washed over Zelda, so profound it left her lightheaded. Then it's over? Almost, Nash replied, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. Vernon's been arrested for arson and attempted murder. His companions, too. With multiple witnesses and the evidence of the fire, they'll face serious charges. Will that be enough to keep him away? Zelda asked, the specter of Vernon's influence still troubling her. Nash's expression softened as he looked at the baby nestled in her arms. I believe so, but even if it's not, nothing will stop me from protecting you both. I meant what I said, Zelda. No one hurts you again while I live. He hesitated, then continued more softly. I know this might seem sudden, given all that's happened, and I know you're still legally tied to another man, but I need you to know that I love you, Zelda Reed, you and this little one. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Tears filled Zelda's eyes anew. After so much pain and fear, Nash's declaration felt like stepping into sunlight after a long winter. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have since that day in the livery stable when you listened to me instead of dismissing me. Nash smiled, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with gentle wonder. And this little lady, what shall we call her? Zelda looked down at her daughter, this miracle who had arrived amid fire and danger yet remained peaceful in her arms. Hope, she said decisively. Her name is Hope. It seemed both a declaration and a promise that despite all they had endured, the future held brightness rather than shadow. The aftermath of that night unfolded with surprising swiftness. Vernon Reed, along with his accomplices, was convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. The evidence against him was overwhelming. bolstered by testimony from Sheriff Donovan about the earlier confrontation at the ranch and Zelda's visible injuries when she had first arrived in Boulder. During the trial, Nash arranged for Zelda to stay in town under the protection of trusted friends. He attended every court session, his steady presence a reminder that she no longer faced adversity alone. With Vernon's imprisonment came an unexpected legal opportunity. The judge, disturbed by the evidence of abuse presented during the trial, granted Zelda a divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty, a rarity in those times but justified, he declared, by the extraordinary circumstances. Freedom, when it finally came, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time since she was 16, Zelda was truly her own person, beholden to no one. "What will you do now?" Nash asked her the evening after the divorce was finalized. They sat on the porch of his townhouse, baby Hope sleeping peacefully in a basket between them. Zelda looked out at the street, busy with the usual traffic of a growing frontier town. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have choices now. That feels strange after so long." Nash nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The ranch is still there, your position too if you want it. No obligations beyond that, unless you choose them." His careful phrasing, his clear effort to give her space to decide her own path, only confirmed what Zelda already knew in her heart. This man, who had risked everything to protect her when he had no reason to do so, who looked at her daughter with love rather than resentment, who offered security without demanding submission, was unlike any she had known before. "What if I want more than a position?" she asked softly. Nash's eyes met hers, hope kindling in their blue depths. "Then name it, and if it's within my power to give, it's yours." "A partnership," Zelda said. "A life built together. A family for Hope." Nash reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I've been waiting to hear those words since the day you stood up to me in that livery stable." 3 weeks later, on a crisp January morning in 1873, Zelda and Nash were married in Boulder's small church. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the ranch hands who had become like family and the few friends they had made in town. Sheriff Donovan served as witness, his presence a silent acknowledgement of how far Zelda had come from the frightened woman who had first arrived in Boulder. Eliza held baby Hope, who remained remarkably quiet throughout, as if understanding the significance of the occasion. As Nash slipped a simple gold band onto Zelda's finger, he repeated the promise he had made months before. "No one hurts you again while I live," he whispered, the words meant for her alone. Zelda's response was equally quiet but no less heartfelt. "And no one hurts you while I live, that's my promise to you." Their first months of marriage brought adjustments and challenges, as any new union does. The ranch required constant attention, especially after the fire damage to the barn. Hope grew rapidly, her personality emerging stubborn like her mother. Nash often teased with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. Spring arrived with unexpected news. Doc Peterson confirmed that Zelda was expecting again, a revelation that brought both joy and trepidation. Her first pregnancy had been shadowed by fear. This one, she determined, would be different, and it was. Nash attended to her with a tenderness that still sometimes brought tears to her eyes, building a cradle with his own hands, reading medical texts to understand what she was experiencing, ensuring she rested when needed while never doubting her strength. Hope's first birthday coincided with the completion of the new nursery, a room adjoining theirs, painted a cheerful yellow with a window overlooking the mountains. Nash had commissioned a rocking chair from the town's carpenter, surprised Zelda with it one evening after supper. "For those midnight feedings coming soon," he explained as she ran her hands over the smooth wood. "Though I expect this one will be used for Hope too, for stories and such." Zelda smiled, picturing the scene herself in this chair with both children, Nash nearby, the family they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. "What are you thinking?" Nash asked, noticing her expression. "That happiness can find you in the strangest places," she replied. "A year and a half ago, I was hiding Bruises and planning an escape with almost no hope of success. Now," she gestured around them at the home they had made together, at Hope playing on a quilt nearby, at the evidence of the child growing within her. Nash knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Now you never have to hide again, not your joys, not your sorrows, not even your anger, he smiled. Especially not your anger. I rather enjoy your fire when it's directed at appropriate targets. Zelda laughed, remembering her recent spirited defense of one of the young ranch hands who had been cheated by a card sharp in town. Nash had watched with evident pride as she confronted the man and retrieved the boy's money through sheer force of will. I never knew I had fire in me, she admitted. Vernon beat it down so thoroughly I thought it was gone forever. Not gone, Nash corrected, just banked, waiting for safe conditions to burn again. He placed a hand on her rounded belly. And now that fire will warm two little ones instead of being extinguished. That's a kind of victory, don't you think? Zelda covered his hand with hers, feeling the baby shift beneath their joined touch. The best kind. Their son, Nicholas Nash Westfield, arrived on a stormy night in late July, easier than Hope's birth, but no less miraculous. He had his father's strong features and his mother's determined chin, a combination that made Nash joke they were in for years of stubborn challenges from the boy. As Zelda watched Nash hold their son, his expression one of awe and devotion, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The fear that had driven her from Cottonwood Springs seemed a lifetime ago, though barely 2 years had passed. The woman she had been then beaten down, desperate, shame her constant companion would scarcely recognize the woman she had become. Hope toddled into the room, eager to meet her new brother. Nash lifted her carefully to see the baby, his large hands steady and sure with both children. That's your brother, little lady, he told Hope. You'll have to help Mama and me teach him all sorts of important things. Hope regarded the baby solemnly before declaring, small, which made both adults laugh. He'll grow, Zelda assured her daughter, just as you have. That night, with both children finally asleep, Nash and Zelda stood on the porch watching stars appear in the velvet sky. His arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, they existed in companionable silence for several minutes before Nash spoke. I received a letter today, he said. From the warden at the territorial prison. Zelda tensed slightly. Vernon, Nash nodded. He's ill, consumption most likely, the warden thought you should know. A complex emotion moved through Zelda, not quite sadness, not quite relief, but something in between. Vernon had been her tormentor, yet once he had also been the young man who had courted her with flowers and sweet words. Somewhere along the way, that man had been lost, consumed by a darkness she would never fully understand. Thank you for telling me, she said finally. Nash tightened his arm around her. Are you all right? Zelda considered the question carefully. Yes, she replied with some surprise. I am. I don't wish him suffering, but I can't pretend his illness affects me deeply either. Is that cold of me? No, Nash said firmly. It's honest. The man forfeited any claim to your compassion through his own actions. They fell silent again, the night peaceful around them. Zelda found herself thinking not of Vernon but of the path that had led her here, the desperate flight, the chance encounter in a livery stable, the gradual building of trust, and finally, love. I used to dream of escape, she said softly. Just of being somewhere Vernon couldn't reach me. I never dared dream of happiness beyond that. Nash turned to face her, framing her face with gentle hands. And now, Zelda smiled up at him, her heart full. Now I dream of decades with you, of watching Hope and Nicholas grow, of perhaps more children, of growing old together on this land. Nash's eyes gleamed in the starlight. Those sound like fine dreams, Mrs. Westfield, the kind worth building a life around. He kissed her then, a tender affirmation of all they had found together against the odds. When they parted, Zelda rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. No one hurts you again while I live, Nash had promised her on that pivotal day months ago, but he had given her far more than protection. He had given her a home, a family, a future built on respect and love rather than fear. And she, who had once hidden her bruises in shame, now stood tall beside him, her head high, her spirit unbroken. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as protector and protected, but as equal partners in the life they had chosen to share. In the quiet of the night, with stars above and the soft sounds of their children sleeping inside, that seemed the greatest miracle of all.